"Bring her to me," the king roared, his voice shaking the ancient stone hall. He expected a defiant, glittering bride. Instead, they dropped a fragile, battered woman at his feet. One look at her bruised skin, and the realm's most ruthless predator completely and terrifyingly lost his mind. History tells us of the fragile peace between the human lords of Wessex and the wild, untamed territories of Mercia in the winter of 942 AD. But the official historical records, carefully curated by frightened monks, leave out the truth of who and what truly ruled the northern woods. To understand what really happened, we have to look at the recently unearthed private journals of Brother Thomas of Malmesbury, a physician who lived through the bloodiest winter the kingdom ever saw. According to his hidden manuscripts, the ruler of Mercia was not just a warlord. He was Athelstan, the Alpha King of the Iron Fang descent, a werewolf of terrifying size and ancient primal power. Athelstan was a ruler forged in ice and war. Standing well over 6.5 feet tall, with piercing amber eyes and scars that told stories of 100 slaughtered challengers, he kept the southern human lords living in absolute, trembling submission. To maintain the borders, a blood treaty was struck. Lord Godfrey, the powerful Ealdorman of Wessex, was forced to offer a bride to the Alpha King to seal their uneasy truce. Godfrey was a cunning, cruel man who despised the beasts of the north. He didn't offer his own flesh and blood. Instead, he offered his ward, Lady Rosalind. Rosalind was a woman of quiet, tragic beauty. Born to a minor noble house that Godfrey had eradicated years prior, she had been kept essentially as a prisoner in Godfrey's estate, hidden away from the world. In the private letters between Godfrey and the King of Francia, which were later found burned in the fireplace of his study, Godfrey outlined a sinister plot. He knew the Alpha King was ruthless, known for his violent temper. Godfrey's plan was sick, but politically brilliant. He would send Athelstan a broken, battered bride, hoping the Alpha King would be so insulted by the damaged offering that he would kill her. This would break the treaty, giving Godfrey the righteous cause he needed to call upon the French armies for a holy war to eradicate the wolves of Mercia forever. Ignorant of this trap, Alpha King Athelstan sat upon his throne in the great keep of Eoferwick. For weeks, a strange, restless energy had plagued him. His inner wolf was pacing, snapping at his commanders, driven by a visceral, agonizing pull toward the south that he could not explain. Unable to wait for the spring thaw, Athelstan dispatched his most lethal vanguard, led by his trusted captain, Fenwick, to ride south and retrieve his new bride immediately. "Bring her to me," Athelstan had commanded, his voice a low, vibrating growl that rattled the iron chandeliers. "Do not stop for snow. Do not stop for blood. Bring the woman to my hall." For 14 days, the keep waited in tense silence. When the heavy oak doors of the great hall finally groaned open in the dead of the night, the freezing wind howled through the corridors, bringing with it a scent that made Athelstan's amber eyes snap up. It was the smell of fear and the unmistakable sharp copper tang of human blood. Fenwick and 6 elite guards marched into the hall. They did not look like victorious escorts. They looked terrified. Their heads were bowed, their shoulders stiff. Between 2 of the largest guards, wrapped in a coarse, filthy travel cloak, was a small, limp figure. "My king," Fenwick began, his voice trembling, a rare sound from a warrior who had faced down battle-axes without blinking. "We bring you the offering from Wessex. But there is a complication." Athelstan stood. The sheer force of his presence seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. "I told you to bring me my bride, Fenwick. Why does my hall reek of blood?" "Bring her to me," the Alpha King ordered, stepping down from the dais, his boots heavy on the stone. The guard stepped forward and gently, almost fearfully, lowered the figure to the icy stone floor. The heavy cloak fell away. The great hall plunged into a deathly, suffocating silence. Laying on the cold stones was Rosalind. She was not dressed in the silks and jewels of a noble bride. She wore a torn, blood-stained linen dress. But it was her face and skin that made the breath catch in Athelstan's throat. Her cheekbone was split and swollen, blooming with deep, horrifying shades of purple and black. Her wrists, bound tightly together with cruel iron chains, were rubbed raw and bleeding. Defensive lacerations marred her delicate forearms, and she was shivering so violently her teeth chattered. She flinched as the cloak fell, curling into a tight ball, throwing her chained hands over her head as if expecting a strike. A tiny broken whimper escaped her cracked lips. Athelstan stopped dead. For a single heartbeat, time itself seemed to freeze. Then the scent hit him. It wasn't just blood. Beneath the dirt, the copper, and the salt of her tears, Athelstan's heightened senses caught a scent that struck him like a bolt of lightning. Wild honey, fresh rain, and crushed pine. Mate. The realization slammed into his chest, stealing his breath. This wasn't just a political pawn. This broken, bleeding woman, cowering on his floor, was his fated mate, the other half of his soul, and someone had dared to put their hands on her. In the chronicles of Brother Thomas, what happened next was described not as the anger of a king, but as a natural disaster. A horrific, deafening roar ripped from Athelstan's throat, a sound so purely animal, so drenched in homicidal fury, that several human servants in the hall immediately fell to their knees, weeping in terror. The sound shattered 3 stained glass windows in the upper gallery. The Alpha King lost completely, totally, and terrifyingly lost control. His bones cracked violently as his body swelled, muscle and sinew expanding as his human guise failed to contain the sheer magnitude of his wrath. His hands elongated into massive, lethal claws, tearing through his leather braces. His eyes didn't just glow, they burned like hellfire. "Who did this?" His voice was no longer human. It was a demonic, layered boom that shook dust from the rafters. Fenwick dropped to one knee, baring his neck in total submission to the Alpha's overpowering aura. "It was Lord Godfrey, my king. When we arrived at the Wessex estate, she was already chained in the dungeons." Godfrey laughed and said she was spirited and needed taming. "We nearly slaughtered his entire garrison on the spot, but we remembered your orders to bring her back alive at all costs." Athelstan's massive, clawed hands shook. The urge to shift entirely into his beast and run south to tear Lord Godfrey limb from limb, to paint the snow red with the blood of Wessex, was overwhelming. His chest heaved, a low, terrifying snort vibrating constantly in his throat. But then, a soft gasp broke through the red haze. Rosalind, terrified by the roaring and the monstrous transformation happening before her, tried to crawl backward. Her chained hands scraped against the stone, her eyes wide with absolute terror. She was looking at him not as a savior, but as a monster about to devour her. That look in her eyes was the only thing powerful enough to halt the Alpha King's wrath. Breathing heavily, Athelstan fought the most brutal internal battle of his life. He forced his claws to retract. He forced his bones to snap back into human form, though his eyes remained a feral, glowing gold. Slowly, deliberately, he dropped to his knees before her. He didn't care that he was the king of Mercia. He didn't care that his entire court was watching. "Leave us," Athelstan growled softly, without looking away from her. "My king," Fenwick started. "Get out!" Athelstan roared. The hall emptied in seconds, leaving only the Alpha and the battered woman. Athelstan crawled forward on his hands and knees, keeping himself low so he wouldn't tower over her. When he reached out, Rosalind flinched violently, squeezing her eyes shut. "Please," she whispered, her voice rasping and fragile. "Please, no more." The sound of her pleading shattered the Alpha King's heart. "I will not hurt you," Athelstan, his voice incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the monster who had just shattered glass with his voice. "Open your eyes, little bird." When she didn't, he carefully reached out and took hold of the heavy iron chains binding her wrists. He didn't look for a key. With a sickening crunch of metal, Athelstan gripped the iron links in his bare hands and pulled. The heavy steel shattered like cheap glass in his grip, falling away from her bleeding wrists. Rosalind opened her eyes, staring in shock at the broken chains, and then at the massive, scarred man kneeling before her. "Who did this to your face?" he asked, his thumb gently hovering inches from her bruised cheek, terrified to actually touch her and cause her pain. "My Lord Godfrey," she whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes, carving clean tracks through the dirt on her face. He said I was worthless, that you would see me, be disgusted, and end my life quickly. I am sorry. I am sorry I am not what you wanted." A violent tremor racked Athelstan's massive frame as he processed the depth of Godfrey's cruelty. He slowly removed his heavy, fur-lined cloak and wrapped it around her frail shoulders. The scent of him, wood smoke and sheer masculine power, seemed to calm her slightly. "He is a dead man," Athelstan stated, not as a threat, but as an undeniable fact of the universe. "Before the next moon rises, his head will decorate the gates of this keep. But right now, you are freezing." Without waiting for permission, but moving slower than he had ever moved in his life, Athelstan scooped her up into his arms. She weighed practically nothing. As her head rested against his chest, her bare skin touched his, and a jolt of pure electric warmth flooded them both. Rosalind gasped. The pain in her wrists instantly began to dull. The mate bond, ancient and powerful, was already trying to heal her. Athelstan carried her up the spiraling stone steps to his private chambers. He kicked the heavy oak doors open and laid her gently on the massive bed covered in dire wolf pelts. He ordered the maids to draw a hot bath and summoned Brother Thomas. According to Thomas's diary, when he entered the king's chambers, he found the terrifying Alpha King of Mercia sitting on the floor beside the bed, holding a cool, wet cloth to the girl's bruised face, weeping silent tears of absolute rage and sorrow. But as Brother Thomas began to examine her wounds, he discovered something that would change the course of history. As he wiped away the dried blood near her collarbone, a distinct, silver-burned brand was revealed on her skin. It was not a slave mark. It was the crest of the true royal bloodline of Britannia. The long-lost Pendragon heirs, thought to have been eradicated a century ago. Rosalind wasn't just a minor noble. She was the rightful queen of the human realm. Godfrey hadn't just abused her. He had kept her hidden and battered to steal her throne. And he sent her to the wolves, hoping they would dispose of the only true threat to his power. When Athelstan saw the royal brand and understood the full scope of what had been done to his mate, the warmth left his eyes, replaced by a cold, apocalyptic darkness. "Brother Thomas," Athelstan whispered, his voice echoing with the promise of thousands of deaths. "Send word to the War Council. Tell them to wake the banners, all of them. We do not stop at Wessex. We are going to burn the entire south to the ground." For 3 days and 3 nights, the great keep of Eoferwick was sealed tight. Outside, the freezing winds of the Mercian winter howled, but inside the high stone walls, a different kind of storm was brewing. According to the continuing entries in Brother Thomas's journal, the Alpha King did not sleep, nor did he eat. He remained a permanent, terrifying fixture at Rosalind's bedside, a massive shadow of muscle and lethal intent, entirely softened by the fragile woman breathing shallowly beneath the dire wolf furs. The mate bond is an ancient magic among the Ironfang descent, and Athelstan used every ounce of his energy to push his own rapid healing into Rosalind. Slowly, the horrific purple and black bruises began to fade to a dull yellow. The deep lacerations on her wrists closed, leaving only pale, silvery scars. On the 4th morning, Rosalind finally woke. She did not wake to a cold dungeon or the cruel laughter of Lord Godfrey's guards. She woke to the crackle of a massive hearth fire and the heavy, comforting scent of wood smoke and pine. When she tried to sit up, a massive hand gently steadied her shoulder. She flinched instinctively, but then her eyes met Athelstan's. The feral, glowing gold of his eyes had shifted back to a warm, deep amber. "You are safe," Athelstan rumbled, his voice low and incredibly gentle. "No one will ever strike you again, Rosalind. On my life and my soul, I swear it." For the first time in her life, Rosalind looked at a man and did not see a threat. The overwhelming, magnetic pull of the mate bond flooded her veins, washing away her terror. But confusion quickly replaced her fear. "Why?" she whispered, her voice still raspy. "Why do you care for a broken thing? Lord Godfrey sent me you to be slaughtered. He wanted to provoke a war." Brother Thomas, who had been quietly grinding herbs in the corner of the chamber, stepped forward. He held a small silver mirror. "You are not a broken thing, my lady," the old monk said gently, handing her the glass. "You are the dawn this kingdom has prayed for." Rosalind looked into the mirror, expecting to see the bruised, filthy girl she had always been. Instead, her skin was pale, but clean, her dark hair brushed until it gleamed. But it was not her face that Thomas wanted her to see. He pointed a trembling finger to the hollow of her collarbone. There, faintly glowing with an ethereal silver light against her skin, was the brand, a rampant dragon clutching a rusted crown. "The Pendragon mark," Rosalind gasped, dropping the mirror. It shattered on the stone floor, the sound echoing sharply in the quiet room. "But that is a myth, a legend to keep the commoners hoping for a true sovereign." "It is no myth," Athelstan said, his jaw tightening as he recalled the cruelty inflicted upon her to keep this secret hidden. "Your bloodline is the true royal house of Britannia. Godfrey knew. He eradicated your family when you were a child, but he could not bring himself to kill the last heir, fearing a divine curse. Instead, he locked you away, battered you into submission, and when he needed a sacrifice to start a holy war, he used you. The revelation hit Rosalind like a physical blow. The years of torment, the starvation, the beatings. It wasn't because she was worthless. It was because she was powerful. She was a threat. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they were not tears of fear. Deep within her chest, a spark of something foreign and fierce ignited. It was anger, an ancient, righteous fury that resonated perfectly with the feral wolf pacing inside Athelstan's soul. "I wanted a war," Rosalind whispered, her voice losing its tremor, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. She looked up at Athelstan, her delicate hand reaching out to touch the heavy, scarred muscles of his forearm. "Are you going to give, my king?" Athelstan's lips curled into a terrifying, predatory smile. He turned his hand, lacing his massive fingers through her small ones. "We are going to give him an apocalypse, my queen." Down in the war room, the atmosphere was electric, with lethal anticipation. Fenwick and the vanguard commanders stood around a massive carved map of the realm, placing iron wolf-head markers across the southern borders. The Alpha King's orders were absolute, and the war machine of Mercia had awakened. "I have never seen the wolves like this," Brother Thomas wrote in a frantic scrawl. "They do not march for territory. They do not march for gold. They march for vengeance. The very earth trembles beneath their boots, and the sky itself seems to darken with their fury." Athelstan addressed his commanders, his voice booming through the cavernous room. "Ton." The vanguard siege. Fenwick would lead a cavalry of 500 shifted wolves to flank the eastern borders, cutting off any escape routes toward the sea. The Iron Guard, Athelstan himself, would lead the main infantry, 3,000 heavily armored human and werewolf soldiers, straight down the King's Road to smash the gates of Wessex. No quarter given. Any soldier bearing Godfrey's crest was to be considered a dead man walking. Surrender was not an option for the high commanders. However, a scout burst into the war room, breathless and covered in frost. "My king!" The scout dropped to a knee. "Treachery. Lord Godfrey has not waited for the spring. He has allied with King Lothair of Francia." A fleet of French mercenaries landed at the southern ports 3 days ago. They are armed with silver-tipped arrows and ironwood pikes. Godfrey's forces have swelled to 10,000 strong, and they are marching north to the River Trent as we speak. A murmur of unease rippled through the human commanders. 10,000 men, armed with silver. One weakness of the werewolf race. Athelstan's expression did not change. He simply stepped up to the map, sweeping the scattered markers off the board with one massive hand. "Let them come to the river," Athelstan growled. "The water will wash the blood away." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the war room swung open. The room fell into a stunned silence. Standing in the doorway was Rosalind. She was no longer wearing the blood-stained linens of a captive. She was clad in a gown of deep crimson, draped with a heavy cloak of black wolf fur. Her posture was rigidly straight, her chin held high. The timid, broken girl was gone, replaced by a woman radiating quiet, absolute authority. "They will not cross the River Trent," Rosalind announced. her voice carrying a strange, compelling resonance that made every man in the room, human and wolf alike, stand a little straighter. Lord Godfrey's armies of conscripted peasants, men from the very lands my ancestors ruled. They fight because they fear him, not because they love him. She walked to Athelstan's side, looking down at the map. If we meet them at the river, I will ride at the front of your vanguard. Absolutely not, Athelstan snapped instantly, his protective instincts flaring into a roaring inferno. I will not let you within 100 leagues of that butcher. Rosalind turned to him, her eyes locking onto his. The mate bond surged between them, a silent communication of strength and defiance. You cannot hide me away, Athelstan. Godfrey hid me in the dark for 20 years. I will not hide behind these walls while your people bleed for my throne. The peasants of Wessex need to see that the Pendragon lives. If they see my mark, they will turn on Godfrey. We can end this slaughter before it begins. Athelstan stared at her, entirely captivated. This was his mate. Fierce, brilliant, and unbreakable. The frozen plains near the River Trent were blanketed in heavy grey fog on the morning of the battle. Across the icy water, the sprawling, massive army of Lord Godfrey and his French mercenaries stood in perfect, disciplined formation. The metallic clinking of 10,000 swords, spears, and silver-tipped arrows created a deafening, terrifying hum that carried across the ice. Lord Godfrey sat atop his armoured warhorse, a sneer of supreme confidence twisting his features. He wore heavy plate armour, confident that his trap had worked perfectly. He had provoked the beasts of the north into a reckless charge against a superior, silver-armed force. Across the river, the Mercian forces emerged from the tree line. They were vastly outnumbered, but they were not afraid. At the absolute front of the line, riding a massive black warhorse, was Alpha King Athelstan. He wore no helmet, his amber eyes burning through the fog like twin suns. And riding beside him, clad in custom-forged chainmail and bearing a shield painted with the red dragon of the Pendragon line, was Rosalind. Godfrey squinted through the fog, his sneer faltering as he recognized the figure beside the Alpha King. Impossible, Godfrey hissed to his general. She should be dead. That beast was supposed to tear her to shreds. Athelstan raised his massive hand, signaling his army to halt. The silence that fell over the Mercian forces was absolute, eerie, and deeply unnatural. Then Rosalind rode forward. She urged her horse onto the frozen surface of the river, stopping exactly halfway between the two massive armies. Men of Wessex! Rosalind's voice rang out, magically amplified by the unique acoustics of the frozen river valley and the sheer, desperate force of her will. You march under the banner of a usurper and a traitor. She reached up and unclasped the heavy fur collar of her cloak, letting it fall away to expose her neck and collarbone to the biting cold. In the pale morning light, the silver brand of the Pendragon seemed to glow with a brilliant, undeniable luminescence. I am Lady Rosalind, the last daughter of the Pendragon line. I bear the mark of the true sovereigns of this land. Lord Godfrey murdered my family, stole my inheritance, and sold me to the wolves to die so he could keep his stolen power. A shocked, murmuring ripple tore through the front lines of Godfrey's peasant infantry. The older men among them recognized the legend. They saw the glowing mark. They looked at the beautiful, fierce woman sitting atop her horse, defying a warlord, and realized they had been drafted into a lie. "Silence her!" Godfrey screamed, his face purple with rage. "Archers, loose your arrows! Kill the witch!" The French mercenary archers drew back their silver-tipped arrows, preparing to fire. That was the exact moment Athelstan's patience evaporated. A roar that shook the very foundations of the earth ripped from the Alpha King's lungs. He didn't just shift. He exploded into his monstrous wolf form. He was an absolute nightmare of black fur, razor-sharp bone spurs, and dripping fangs, standing 8 feet tall on his hind legs. Before the archers could release their bowstrings, the Alpha King lunged forward, clearing the frozen river in 3 massive, physics-defying bounds. He crashed into the front lines of the French mercenaries like a falling meteor, sending armored men flying through the air like broken toys. Behind him, Fenwick and the vanguard shifted mid-sprint, 500 massive wolves roaring into battle, their howls blending with the war cries of the human infantry. The battle was utter chaos, but Rosalind's gambit had worked. Seeing the sheer, terrifying power of the Alpha King and realizing they were fighting against their true rightful queen, nearly half of Godfrey's peasant infantry threw down their weapons. Many of them turned their spears on the French mercenaries, fighting to protect the woman on the black horse. Athelstan was a force of natural destruction. Silver arrows grazed his thick hide, but his rage fueled a healing factor that made him practically invincible. He carved a bloody, brutal path straight through the center of the enemy lines, his eyes locked entirely on Lord Godfrey. Godfrey turned his horse, attempting to flee in a cowardly panic, but his heavy armor slowed him down. With a terrifying leap, Athelstan landed directly in front of the usurper's horse, startling the beast so badly it reared up and threw Godfrey into the freezing mud. Godfrey scrambled backward, drawing a silver dagger, his eyes wide with absolute, pathetic terror. "Wait, wait! I am the Ealdor man of Wessex. You cannot kill me." Athelstan stalked forward, shifting back into his human form. He stood over the trembling, pathetic lord, his chest heaving, covered in the blood of his enemies. He looked down at Godfrey, feeling nothing but cold, absolute disgust. "You did not respect my treaty," Athelstan growled, his voice a low, rumbling earthquake. "You did not respect your true queen, and you dared to put your hands on my mate." Athelstan did not use a sword. He simply reached down, gripped Godfrey by the throat, and with a swift, brutal, and completely silent motion, ended the usurper's life. The battlefield fell utterly silent as the Alpha King dropped the lifeless body of Lord Godfrey into the mud. The remaining French mercenaries, seeing their paymaster dead and facing down an army of raging werewolves, immediately dropped their weapons and surrendered. The war was over before noon. Athelstan turned, ignoring the carnage around him, his eyes scanning frantically through the fog until he saw her. Rosalind rode toward him, entirely untouched, surrounded by a protective circle of kneeling Wessex soldiers who had sworn instant fealty to her. Athelstan walked toward her, dropping to one knee in the blood-soaked mud, bowing his head to the woman who had conquered his heart and united a shattered realm. "My queen," he rumbled. Rosalind slid from her horse, ignoring the mud and the blood, and threw her arms around his massive neck. "My king," she whispered, pulling his face down to press her lips fiercely against his. According to Brother Thomas's final entries, the union of Queen Rosalind of the Pendragon and Alpha King Athelstan brought an unprecedented golden age to Britannia. The wolves protected the borders, and the humans rebuilt the cities. The girl who had been sent to the beasts as a broken sacrifice became the most beloved ruler the realm had ever known, standing fearlessly beside a monster who loved her more than life itself. Do you want more breathtaking werewolf romance, ancient secrets, and epic battles for survival and love? If Rosalind and Athelstan's fiery revenge story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Share this video with your fellow fantasy romance addicts, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another dramatic tale of fated mates and royal betrayal. Drop a comment below. What would you have done to Lord Godfrey?